"Get rid of that child or get out!" my husband screamed when I refused an abortion. I left with nothing. Years later, my son saved his life in surgery. He asked who the doctor was. I held his hand and said, "The son you never wanted." The morning sun filtered weakly through the kitchen blinds, casting soft stripes across the tile floor. Emily stood barefoot near the sink, the pregnancy test trembling in her hand. It was positive. Again. Her heart raced as she tried to steady her breath, her fingers gripping the edge of the countertop. She had taken 3 tests already, but this one made it real. There was no denying it now. She was going to have a baby. Across the room, the smell of burnt toast lingered from the breakfast she had failed to eat. Her stomach twisted, not from nausea, but from the weight of what she had to do next. Travis was still upstairs, asleep, or pretending to be. They hadn't spoken much in recent weeks. Work, routine, and unspoken distance had carved a silence between them that neither dared to name. But this news couldn't wait. She had rehearsed the words all night, but now they dissolved in her mouth like snow. Climbing the stairs, she heard the faint buzz of Travis's phone and the creak of the floorboard outside their bedroom. She opened the door slowly. He was lying on his side, the blankets pulled around him. His eyes opened when he sensed her presence. "What is it?" he mumbled, voice rough with sleep. Emily hesitated. "Travis, I'm pregnant." The silence that followed felt longer than the words she had spoken. Travis sat up slowly, staring at her without blinking. "You're what?" "I'm pregnant," she repeated more softly. He rubbed his face, swung his legs off the bed and stood up. There was no joy on his face, no shock, no warmth, only cold calculation. "We said we weren't ready," he said flatly. "I know," Emily replied, her voice trembling. "But it happened and I want to keep it." He turned toward her sharply. "No, absolutely not." Emily took a small step back, clutching her hands together. "I've thought about it, I've felt it. This is a part of me already." "You're not thinking clearly," he said. "We can't afford a child right now, our lives will be ruined." "I can make it work," she pleaded. "I'll take more shifts. We'll manage." Travis laughed bitterly. "You'll manage? You? With what money? With what time? You're barely getting by as it is." His tone was rising, the edge in his voice turning sharper with each word. Emily tried to speak, but he cut her off. "No," he said. "You're going to end this. We're not doing this, Emily." She felt her chest tighten. "I can't. I won't." Travis stared at her for a long, piercing moment. Then he said something that would burn into her memory forever. "Then get out." The words fell like a gavel. Final. Unforgiving. Get rid of that child, or get out. Emily stood there frozen, tears rising fast. "You don't mean that." He walked past her down the stairs into the kitchen. She followed, still hoping for softness in his voice, a trace of the man she once loved. "I mean it," he said, without looking at her. "If you walk out that door with that pregnancy, don't bother coming back." Emily stared at him, her thoughts a blur. She thought about the house they had made into a home, the plans they once whispered under blankets, the promises exchanged on rainy days, but all of it shattered in that moment. Her hands trembled as she reached for her coat. She packed a small suitcase, not knowing where she was going, only that she couldn't stay. Travis didn't try to stop her. She closed the door behind her, the wind biting her cheeks as she stepped into the cold. She had no place to go, no plan, no savings to fall back on. But she had something stronger, an instinct that came from deep within her. She would protect the life inside her, no matter the cost. Walking down the block, suitcase in hand, she passed familiar houses, blinking away the tears. It was just after 7 o'clock in the morning and the world was waking up, unaware that hers had just collapsed. A kind neighbor waved from her porch, but Emily looked away. She couldn't bear to be seen like this. By the time she reached the bus stop, her fingers were numb and her mind was racing. She remembered the small brochure someone had once left at the clinic where she worked. Resources for single mothers, a shelter run by a nearby church. She dug into her coat pocket, hoping it was still there. It was. The address was scribbled in the corner. She whispered a silent prayer, more reflex than faith, and boarded the bus with the last of her change. Her life, as she knew it, was gone. But somewhere deep inside, as the bus pulled away from the only home she had ever known as a wife, Emily felt a flicker of something else. not fear, hope. The shelter was a red brick building, tucked between a quiet street and a rundown playground. From the outside, it looked like any small community center, but for Emily, it was a lifeline. The sign on the door read, Hannah's Haven, Transitional Housing for Women and Children. She stood there for a long moment before knocking, her suitcase by her feet, and her other hand resting gently on her stomach. She had nothing else but what she carried with her, and that included the fragile determination not to let this child be unwanted. A soft-spoken woman named Carla opened the door, her expression kind but tired. She took one look at Emily's face and nodded, as if she'd seen that same look 100 times. She didn't ask questions, just led her inside where the scent of warm oatmeal and disinfectant filled the air. The reception was simple: white walls, folding chairs, faded posters offering encouragement. Carla handed her a clipboard. Emily filled out the intake forms in silence, her fingers trembling only once when she reached the line for emergency contact. She left it blank. She was assigned a small room with a twin bed, a shared bathroom down the hall, and a dresser missing one drawer. It felt colder than it was, but it was safe. That night she lay on the bed fully clothed, staring at the ceiling. She didn't cry, not because the pain wasn't there, but because it was too deep for tears. Instead, she wrapped her arms around her belly, barely noticeable yet unmistakably alive, and whispered, "We'll be okay." The following days blurred into one another. Emily met with a caseworker named June, who helped her apply for food assistance, prenatal care, and part-time work through a clinic that took in flexible nursing shifts. Her license was still active, and despite the instability in her personal life, she was still a capable nurse. At the clinic, she worked long hours drawing blood, taking vitals, and comforting patients, all while hiding the storm inside her. She smiled when required, never shared more than necessary, and kept her conversations short. The silence she carried wasn't just around her, it was inside her. She felt invisible, and that invisibility became her armor. At night, she returned to the shelter. Meals were shared in a communal dining room where other women, most with children in tow, sat in silence or soft chatter. No one asked why she was there. They all carried their own scars. Some had bruises that hadn't fully faded. Others had stories folded into tight, weary expressions. Emily kept to herself, nodding politely but rarely speaking. She read books when she could, journals about maternal health and infant development, trying to remind herself she still had a future worth preparing for. The quietest part of her days was also the most sacred, the moments she spent alone, hands resting on her belly, talking in a whisper to the growing life inside. She hadn't told anyone the name she had already chosen, but in her heart she had always known it would be Daniel. The name brought her peace. It gave shape to the bond she was building, not with a stranger, but with someone who already gave her strength in ways no one else ever had. Months passed. Her belly grew. So did her resolve. She moved out of the shelter into a subsidized apartment not far from the clinic. It was barely furnished, and the heat was unreliable, but it was hers. Carla had helped her secure the place through a community outreach program. Emily stood in the empty living room the day she moved in, a cardboard box of second-hand kitchenware on the floor, and exhaled for the first time in what felt like weeks. She was no longer homeless. It wasn't much, but it was a beginning. She bought a small crib from a thrift store, assembled it piece by piece with a screwdriver borrowed from a neighbor. The walls were still bare and her fridge often empty, but every item she placed in the apartment was a declaration. She had chosen this life, this child, and she would not regret it. Her prenatal checkups became a steady rhythm in her life. The doctors noted her resilience but also her exhaustion. She was anemic, sleep-deprived, and dangerously close to burnout. Still, she pressed on. She worked through backaches and swollen ankles, never missing a shift. She saved every dollar she could, refusing to spend on anything not essential. Sometimes, when sleep came late, she would stare at the ceiling and wonder if Travis ever thought of her, if he wondered where she went, or if she had followed through with his demand. She never allowed herself to imagine reconciliation. He had made his choice, she had made hers. There was no turning back. One night, lying on the couch, she felt the first real kick. It was sudden, soft, but undeniable. Her hand flew to her stomach and she froze, tears welling in her eyes, not from sadness but from awe. She whispered, "You're really there," and began to cry quietly into the blanket, allowing herself that release for the first time in weeks. Emily began to document everything in a worn notebook she kept under her pillow, her fears, her hopes, her little victories. The day she finished paying off her hospital copay, the day a patient thanked her for her kindness, the day Daniel moved so strongly she had to sit down in the middle of a bus ride just to laugh and cry all at once. She wrote to him, not knowing if she would ever have the courage to show him those pages. "You are not a mistake. You are not a burden. You are the reason I kept going." The silence that had once wrapped around her like a blanket now began to peel away. She started speaking more at work, smiling more at neighbors, even laughing occasionally with other mothers she met at the clinic. The isolation wasn't gone, but it no longer defined her. She had found a quiet kind of strength, the kind that doesn't need to prove anything to anyone. As her due date approached, she prepared her home the best she could. She folded baby clothes donated from the shelter's network. She cleaned obsessively, arranging and rearranging the few items she owned. She made space in her heart not just for a child, but for the woman she was becoming, a mother forged in silence, solitude, and stubborn hope. On a grey morning near the end of her third trimester, she stood in front of the mirror, hands on her belly, and said aloud for the first time, "We made it." It wasn't a declaration of victory, not yet, but it was a truth she could finally believe in. She had been broken, left behind, stripped of almost everything, but she had not let go. She had not disappeared, and soon Daniel would be here. Labor began quietly, almost imperceptibly, like the soft echo of a distant drum. Emily had felt strange all morning, restless, alert, her body speaking in subtle shifts. She had walked the length of her small apartment multiple times, tidied the same corner twice, and rearranged the contents of the diaper bag without knowing why. By late afternoon, the first real contraction arrived. Not a cramp, not a flutter. This was deeper, fuller. Her breath hitched. She checked the clock. It was 4:43. She didn't panic. Panic had long since burned out of her system. Instead, she called the clinic, packed the final items she needed, and took a cab to the hospital using the last of her emergency cash. The ride felt long, though traffic was light. Her hands gripped the seatbelt across her belly, her eyes fixed on the window as the city rolled by. She was alone, but not lonely. The baby moved once, slow, strong, reassuring. She whispered, "Almost there." Daniel came into the world at 3:20 in the morning after 14 hours of labor. It was neither easy nor smooth. There were complications, a moment of worry, a sudden silence before the first cry. But he was healthy, with a strong heartbeat and a pair of lungs that let the entire ward know he had arrived. Emily held him against her chest, tears streaming silently as the warmth of his tiny body melted everything else away. There were no flowers, no visitors, no one in the waiting room, but she didn't care. She had never felt more full. The first weeks blurred in a haze of feedings, diaper changes, and stolen hours of sleep. The apartment became a cocoon, fragile but functional. Every surface bore traces of Daniel's presence: bottles on the counter, laundry drying on chairs, a lullaby playlist humming from a cracked speaker. Emily moved through it all with quiet efficiency, running on instinct and caffeine. There were nights when exhaustion nearly overwhelmed her, when Daniel's cries felt like waves crashing against already splintered shores. But even in those moments, she never regretted her choice. She returned to part-time work at the clinic when Daniel was 8 weeks old, relying on a kind elderly neighbor named Mrs. Kellner to watch him during her shifts. The woman had raised 5 children of her own and welcomed Daniel with a softness that brought tears to Emily's eyes. "He's a keeper," she said the first day, cradling him with practiced hands. Emily thanked her more times than she could count. Finances were tight. Every dollar had a purpose. Rent, formula, diapers, utilities. It was a delicate balancing act, with no room for error. Emily learned to cook in bulk, to stretch every meal, to shop second-hand with pride instead of shame. Her clothes grew worn, her shoes thin, but Daniel never went without. She took on weekend shifts when possible, and by the time he was 6 months old, she was managing 3 different clinic rotations, rotating days and evenings to make it work. There was no time for friendships, no space for dating. Her world revolved around Daniel and the schedules that sustained their fragile life. But within that narrow orbit, something strong was forming. A rhythm, a foundation. Emily found ways to create joy out of very little. She saved scraps of colored paper to make mobiles, read library books aloud with changing voices, and turned bath time into an adventure. Daniel responded with laughter, curiosity, and an alertness that felt beyond his age. By his first birthday, he was walking with confidence and babbling in long strings of nonsense that carried clear intent. Emily threw a small celebration in the apartment, just her, Daniel, and a single cupcake with a candle. She sang softly, holding him close, and whispered, "We're still here." Every milestone became a kind of proof, not to the world, but to herself, that she had done it, that she could keep doing it. The first time Daniel said, "Mama," the first step without falling, the first time he hugged her neck tightly without prompting, each moment fed the fire inside her that had never quite gone out. Over time, the apartment filled with signs of growth. Daniel's artwork, all messy handprints and crooked rainbows, hung proudly on the refrigerator. A small bookshelf appeared in the corner, stacked with children's books and medical journals. Emily had started taking night courses online, determined to work toward her nurse practitioner license. She studied after Daniel fell asleep, sometimes dozing off with her head against her laptop, only to wake and resume without complaint. She wasn't chasing success for the sake of ambition. She was building a life, a real one, one with options, one where Daniel could look back and see not just how much she loved him, but how hard she fought for every inch of their journey. There were setbacks, moments when the car broke down, or the heating failed, or Daniel caught a fever that lasted through the night. There were times she thought about calling Travis, if only to scream at him, to tell him what he was missing. But she never picked up the phone. He had made his choice. She would not give him the power to wound her again. Instead, she wrote letters she never sent. Letters to herself, to Daniel, sometimes even to Travis. Not out of longing, but as a way to let the weight out of her chest. In one, she wrote, "You gave me nothing, but look what I made out of it." She tucked it into a drawer and never looked at it again. As Daniel grew older, he began to mirror her strength. He was curious, kind, observant. He asked questions constantly, especially about how things worked. He loved puzzles, took apart toys just to reassemble them, and sat for long stretches watching her work when she brought home medical brochures or anatomy flashcards. She started noticing his fascination with the human body, how hearts beat, how lungs breathe, how bones mend. It started as innocent curiosity, but grew into something deeper, more focused. One evening when he was 5, he watched her bandage a scrape on his knee and asked, "Do doctors fix everything?" Emily smiled. "Not everything, but they try really hard." He nodded with all the seriousness a child could muster and said, "I think I want to be one." She held his gaze, her heart swelling, and whispered, "You'd be amazing." It began with a school assignment, harmless on the surface, just a family tree drawn in bright crayon on a sheet of poster board. Daniel came home clutching it carefully, excited to show her. His name sat at the center in a bold blue circle, branches reaching outward in all directions. Emily saw her own name at the top left, next to the label Mom. Below that, a space left blank. On the right side, a single word hovered. "Dad?" She smiled, tracing the lines with her finger. "You did a great job," she said softly. Daniel tilted his head. "But I don't know what to write here," he said, pointing to the empty space. Emily sat down beside him on the floor. The late afternoon sun warmed the room, and somewhere in the hallway, the neighbor's radio hummed a familiar tune. Her heart beat louder than both. "I can help with that," she said slowly, though her voice betrayed her. He nodded, his eyes steady, waiting. She looked at the paper again. 100 thoughts rushed forward, memories she had buried, pain she had dulled over the years. It had been so long since she had thought about Travis as anything other than a shadow. And now here was Daniel, not angry or demanding, but simply curious, asking a question she had always known would come. "Your father," she began, but the words stalled. She wasn't ready to talk about abandonment or ultimatums, not when Daniel's world was still so small, so full of trust. "What was his name?" he asked, sensing her hesitation. She answered that much. "His name was Travis." "Did he like science too?" Emily hesitated. "I don't really know," she said, which was true. She had never asked, and he had never offered. "Is he a doctor?" Daniel asked next, his face lighting up with the thought. "No," she said, smiling gently. "I don't think he was interested in medicine." Daniel nodded slowly, processing. "Why don't we talk to him?" Her heart sank. She had no anger in that moment, only the deep ache of knowing she would never have the right answer. She didn't want to poison Daniel with her pain, didn't want to give him a version of his father filtered through bitterness, but she also couldn't lie. "He wasn't ready to be a parent," she said finally, "so I raised you on my own." Daniel looked at her for a long time. Then, as if sensing the edge of something he didn't want to cross, he asked no more questions. He went back to his markers and added a heart next to her name. That night, after he had fallen asleep, Emily sat on the edge of his bed, brushing his hair gently. The dim glow of the hallway light caught the contours of his face, so peaceful, so open. She thought about the years that had passed. Every night she had held him during a fever, every birthday she had planned alone, every lunch she had packed with handwritten notes tucked inside. She whispered, "You've always had everything you needed." Still, the question lingered. In the weeks that followed, Daniel didn't bring it up again, but Emily noticed the shift. He watched other kids with their fathers more closely. At the park, at school events, at birthday parties, his eyes followed those moments like someone collecting puzzle pieces for a picture he couldn't yet complete. He didn't say anything, but Emily felt the weight of what he wasn't asking. One evening, they were walking home from the grocery store when they passed a man playing catch with his son in a front yard. Daniel slowed down. The ball soared through the air, the boy missed, and the father laughed before jogging over to retrieve it. Daniel turned to her and said, "Do you think I'd be good at baseball?" "I think you'd be great," she replied, smiling. "Would you play with me sometime?" "Of course," she said. But later that week, when she brought home a second-hand glove and offered to take him to the park, he said he was too tired. The sparkle had dimmed slightly. Emily knew it wasn't about baseball. She tried to fill the space the best she could. They built elaborate Lego cities together. She signed him up for a weekend robotics club. They spent Saturday mornings watching science documentaries and Sunday afternoons making volcano experiments in the kitchen. But she also knew that no amount of activity could erase the question that hung in the background, unspoken, but ever present. One night, while putting away laundry, she found a paper under his pillow. It was a drawing, stick figures, 2 of them. One was labeled me, the other Dad. They were both wearing lab coats standing in front of a hospital. At the bottom, he had written in big block letters, "Maybe someday." She folded the paper quietly, placed it in the back of the drawer and turned off the light. As time moved on, she learned to navigate the silence around that question. She let Daniel express himself in his own time, never pushing, never hiding, just gently guiding him toward the truth without letting it harden into resentment. She didn't tell him about the night Travis gave the ultimatum. She didn't say that he had never once tried to reach out. She chose instead to tell him what was still true, that he was loved, that he was chosen, and that his worth had never depended on who showed up or who didn't. In the quiet moments, when the questions returned to his eyes, she answered them with presence, with consistency, with a patience that told him even without words that he was never alone. And little by little, Daniel stopped drawing stick figures with question marks. He began drawing rockets and operating rooms, and hearts with valves and arteries. His world shifted again, forward, outward, into a future where answers weren't as important as the dreams he carried. Emily kept every drawing. The envelope arrived without warning, tucked between utility bills and coupon flyers, its creamy texture and embossed return address setting it apart from the mundane. Emily nearly tossed it aside until she noticed the sender's name, Carson and Bell Legal Associates. The logo was unfamiliar, but the name printed in neat type just below it was not. Travis K. Whitmore. Her fingers hesitated, the air still around her. She hadn't seen or heard that name in over 10 years. She stared at the envelope for a long time before opening it. Daniel was at school, and the apartment was quiet except for the ticking of the wall clock. She sat at the kitchen table, the letter opener slipping slightly in her grip. Inside, the pages were thick and crisp, the tone formal, the language distant. The letter wasn't from Travis directly, but dictated through his attorney. He was undergoing a high-risk cardiac surgery and had been advised to get his affairs in order. As part of this process, the lawyer was contacting past relations to clarify any financial or legal connections. No mention of reconciliation, no apology, not even a line asking how she was. Just a list of questions. Had she ever legally filed for divorce? Was there any shared property remaining? Did she wish to waive any claims? Emily folded the letter back into the envelope without finishing it. Her hands trembled slightly, not with emotion, but with the weight of history pressing against the fragile life she had rebuilt. It wasn't pain that surfaced, it was a hollow kind of disbelief. After all this time, his first contact wasn't about the child he'd cast aside, but about his paperwork. He had not asked about Daniel, not once. That night, she didn't tell Daniel. She couldn't. The topic of his father had long since faded from their conversations. Daniel, now a confident teenager, was buried in his studies, preparing for his final exams with the same intensity he gave to everything. He had just been accepted into an advanced preparatory summer program in biomedical sciences. Emily had watched his reaction, part awe, part determination, and felt again that same flicker of pride that had carried her through his infancy. He had become everything she'd dreamed, and more: kind, disciplined, curious, a quiet force of compassion with a mind wired for precision. But now the past threatened to intrude. Emily didn't respond to the letter. She placed it in a file marked personal and tucked it into the back of the closet behind outdated insurance forms and Daniel's earliest report cards. She knew better than to trust a resurgence of interest from a man who had made himself a ghost. Still, the knowledge of his surgery haunted her, not because she feared for him, but because she knew what it meant. If he died, Daniel would never have the choice to know or reject him. And if he lived, there might come a day when their paths crossed in a way neither could control. Weeks passed. The letter faded into the background, just another relic hidden from view. Emily busied herself with work and kept her focus on Daniel. The apartment now bore the signs of a scholar's haven: textbooks spread across the kitchen table, anatomical charts pinned to the walls, models of hearts and lungs scattered among everyday items. Daniel lived and breathed medicine, and Emily supported him every step of the way. Then one evening, while sorting through the mail, she received a second envelope. This one was thinner, plain, no letterhead. Inside was a medical information request form with Travis's name, date of birth, and a list of emergency contacts. Her name was not among them, but what caught her attention was the hospital listed at the bottom: Memorial Heart Center in Cleveland. The same hospital where Daniel had just been offered a summer internship, one of only 10 students accepted in the region. The coincidence left her breathless. She did not sleep that night. Every possible outcome played through her mind. What if they passed in the hallway? What if Travis saw him and recognized nothing? What if Daniel unknowingly stood beside the man who had rejected his existence? The possibilities unraveled into quiet dread. Still, she said nothing. She couldn't. Daniel had worked too hard for this opportunity. She would not let a past mistake cloud his path. As summer approached, Daniel packed with the enthusiasm of a young man on the brink of his future. Emily helped him fold shirts, double-check his documents, and prepare meals he could reheat on busy days. She kept the worry locked deep inside, smiling when he smiled, encouraging him when his nerves crept in. On the morning he left, he hugged her tightly, his arms now broader, his voice deeper. "I'll call every day," he promised. "You don't have to," she replied, brushing his hair gently as she always had. "Just do your best." He kissed her cheek and stepped into the cab. She watched it drive away, her heart split in two, half swelling with pride, half shadowed by a question she dared not voice. After he left, she stood in the doorway, holding a mug of untouched coffee. The quiet returned, but it wasn't peaceful. It was heavy. She glanced once more at the folder buried deep in the closet, then turned away. What was done, and yet fate, it seemed, had begun to move. The first day at Memorial Heart Center began before the sun rose. Daniel stood in front of the hospital's glass entrance, backpack slung over one shoulder, his ID badge freshly clipped to his coat pocket. The early morning air was crisp, and the city buzzed faintly in the background, still half asleep. He took a deep breath and walked through the automatic doors, heart pounding with a mix of nerves and determination. Inside, The world moved with quiet purpose. Nurses wheeled charts, residents crossed halls with coffee in hand, and the scent of antiseptic filled the air. This was exactly where he wanted to be. Assigned to a structured shadowing program, Daniel was one of the youngest interns there, but his composure and precision quickly caught attention. By the end of the first week, his mentor, Dr. Hayes, had already praised his focus during observation rounds. Daniel absorbed everything: techniques, terminology, bedside demeanor. He took notes obsessively, spent breaks reviewing medical literature, and asked thoughtful questions that surprised even seasoned staff. His passion for cardiovascular medicine was unmistakable. Every moment inside the hospital felt like a step closer to something he'd long imagined, but never fully grasped until now. At night, he returned to his temporary housing, an older dormitory 5 blocks from the hospital, and called Emily like clockwork. Their conversations were short but full. He told her about the surgeries he observed, the patients he met, the details he was learning. She listened with a smile in her voice, asking the right questions, encouraging his confidence. What she never shared was how tightly she clutched the phone during those calls, her breath catching each time he mentioned the name of a doctor or a department, silently relieved each time Travis's name didn't appear. One morning in the 3rd week, Daniel's team was called for an emergency case. A middle-aged male patient had arrived in cardiac distress, his condition unstable. The diagnosis was a severe aortic dissection requiring immediate intervention. Dr. Hayes led the briefing with urgency, assembling a team of surgical residents and assistants. Daniel, though still officially a shadow, was granted permission to observe from a close vantage point inside the OR, a rare opportunity for someone his age. As the team prepped, Daniel noted the patient's information written on the chart. Male, 54 years old, history of hypertension, no emergency contacts listed. The name was obscured by a sheet, but Daniel didn't think to ask. In the whirlwind of preparation, focus mattered more than identity. He donned his scrubs, scrubbed in quietly, and took his place near the observation line, eyes fixed on the controlled chaos unfolding around him. The surgery was complex. The lead surgeons moved with synchronized precision, voices calm but firm. Blood pressure readings fluctuated dangerously. The repair required near-perfect coordination, and midway through the procedure, Dr. Hayes gestured for Daniel to step closer and assist in monitoring vitals from the sideboard. It wasn't part of the protocol, but Hayes trusted him. Daniel nodded, hands steady, gaze sharp. He followed instructions without hesitation, his voice clear, his readings accurate. Not once did he glance at the face of the man on the table. The sterile drape covered most of the patient's features, and Daniel, trained now to see the body as a system, not a story, stayed focused on the beating heart beneath. The operation lasted nearly 5 hours. When it ended, the surgeons removed their gloves in silence, satisfied but cautious. The patient had survived the hardest part. Recovery would be slow and the risk remained, but the repair was complete. As the team wheeled the man to post-op, Daniel helped document the final vitals and cleared the tray of instruments. He didn't know the man's name. To him, the patient was a success, a fragile life stabilized, another lesson logged, another step toward becoming the doctor he aspired to be. That evening, Daniel sat on the dormitory bed, reviewing his notes, unaware that a chapter of his own history had passed through his hands. Emily, meanwhile, had spent the day restless. She told herself it was nothing, just a mother's nerves, an echo of the past pulling her out of her routines. She cleaned the apartment twice, reorganized the pantry, even tried to read, but nothing settled her. At sunset, unable to sit still, she logged into the hospital's public database. Her hands shook as she typed Travis's name. The result appeared instantly. Admitted. Status: post-operative recovery. Surgery date: that very morning. She covered her mouth with her hand. The weight of it hit her all at once. Daniel had been there, maybe in the hallway, maybe closer. She didn't know, but the timing, the place, it was too exact. Her thoughts spiraled. What if he had seen Travis? What if he found out by accident? What would that do to him? She reached for her phone but stopped short of dialing. She couldn't ask. Not yet. Daniel called as usual, full of energy, describing the emergency case, the tension in the OR, the feeling of standing just inches from the open chest of a real patient. Emily listened, her voice calm, her mind elsewhere. She asked carefully, "Do you remember the patient's name?" He paused. No. Everything was so fast. Just an ID number. She nodded, forcing her voice to remain level. "You did good work today," she said. "Thanks, Mum." After they hung up, she sat in the dark for a long time. It wasn't the coincidence that shook her. It was the possibility that life, with all its chaos and precision, had turned in a full circle without their permission. She remembered holding Daniel as a newborn, alone in the hospital, watching the sun rise through the window, promising him a life built on truth and choice. And now he stood, unknowingly, at the edge of a truth that had waited more than a decade to find its way back. She knew then that silence would not hold forever. The atmosphere inside Memorial Heart Center shifted in subtle ways following the high-risk surgery. Word of the successful emergency repair had spread through the department, and the surgical team earned quiet recognition from attending physicians and administrators alike. For Daniel, it wasn't just another observation. It was confirmation that he could belong in a world defined by skill, pressure, and life-altering decisions. He had felt it in the intensity of the operating room, in the quiet nod from Dr. Hayes afterward, and in the way the senior residents began greeting him with familiarity rather than formality. His days took on a sharper rhythm. Mornings began before dawn, filled with patient updates, equipment prep, and observation rounds. Afternoons were reserved for post-op monitoring, lab discussions, and presentations. Evenings often stretched into the night, reading research articles under the glow of a desk lamp, his mind mapping the intricate architecture of the human heart. Despite the exhaustion, he never once considered stepping back. This was exactly where he wanted to be. Then came the reassignment. Dr. Hayes approached Daniel after morning rounds with a calm but unreadable expression. "We're restructuring some rotations," he said. "I'd like you to work closer to the recovery wing this week. We've got a long-term post-op case who could use some consistent monitoring. You'd be shadowing 2 senior residents, but I want you nearby. Observe his vitals, document his responses, coordinate between the cardiac floor and the attending surgeon." Daniel agreed without hesitation. It was more hands-on time, more exposure to the recovery process. He welcomed it. When he was handed the patient chart, the name still didn't register. There were hundreds of charts. He skimmed the essentials: male, mid-50s, post-aortic dissection repair, high blood pressure history, borderline diabetic. Daniel prepared a vitals chart and stepped into the assigned room for the first time. The man was unconscious, still under sedation. His face was pale, jawline tense with lines across his forehead that suggested years of stress rather than age. His left hand twitched slightly under the blanket as machines beeped in soft, regular tones. Daniel approached with quiet precision, checking oxygen saturation levels, logging blood pressure, marking down responsiveness. Nothing unusual. He noted a minor drop in pulse variability and alerted the attending. Adjustments were made. The patient stabilized. For the next 3 days, Daniel returned to the room at regular intervals, maintaining logs, watching for anomalies, and silently learning from the subtle dance of post-surgical recovery. The patient's name remained to Daniel just a line on a chart. Mr. Whitmore was how the nurses referred to him, though the name never stirred familiarity. It was a surname like any other. On the 4th day, the patient began regaining consciousness. Brief moments of awareness came and went. Daniel stood nearby, noting pupil reaction and cognitive responsiveness. Once, Mr. Whitmore opened his eyes for longer than a second, groggy and unfocused. He muttered something unintelligible, blinked several times, then fell back asleep. Daniel didn't think much of it. He had seen similar cases. Waking took time. Memories returned in fragments. That night, Emily sat alone at home, staring once again at the online hospital portal. The status had changed. Travis was no longer listed as sedated. He had entered post-op phase 2, marked by increased alertness and supervised mobility. Her stomach turned. She hadn't told Daniel, still uncertain how to breach the boundary between protection and truth. Every day that passed widened the risk of accidental discovery. And yet, she still hesitated. Daniel, unaware of the quiet storm gathering, focused intently on his assigned work. He continued tracking Travis's progress, monitoring pain levels, overseeing light physiotherapy efforts, helping reposition equipment. The familiarity of the routine masked the gravity of the coincidence. Daniel operated with clinical detachment, as he had been trained to do, but the moment of recognition came not from a name, not from a chart, but from a voice. On the 6th day, Travis woke more fully. His speech was clearer, though raspy, his tone gruff, but controlled. As Daniel adjusted the IV stand, Travis turned his head slightly. "You one of the interns?" he asked. Daniel nodded. "Yes, sir. Daniel Whitmore, medical intern, assigned to your recovery wing." Travis blinked at the surname, his eyes narrowing briefly. "Whitmore," he repeated, the syllables dragging slightly. "Yes," Daniel replied, without noticing the pause. "You from around here?" Travis asked next. "Cincinnati, originally. Now here for the internship," Daniel answered, keeping it professional. Travis nodded slowly, then looked away, eyes distant. "I used to live there." Daniel offered no reply, returning to the chart. He didn't like to make small talk with recovering patients unless necessary. But as he turned to leave, Travis said quietly, "Strange how the world works, huh?" Daniel offered a polite smile. "It is." The exchange, simple as it was, lingered with Travis long after Daniel had gone. He stared at the ceiling, thoughts unraveling. The surname, the city, the age. Something scratched at the back of his mind. A memory, not yet formed. But he was still weak, his thoughts muddled. He closed his eyes again and let it drift. Later that night, Daniel called Emily with his usual update. He mentioned the patient in passing. Still stable, talking now, nothing unusual. Emily's voice didn't waver, but something inside her broke quietly. The time had nearly arrived. She could feel it pressing in on every side. The lines of their lives, so long separated, were moving toward each other with impossible precision. She ended the call softly, wished him good night, and sat in the silence that followed. The world outside the window was quiet, unaware of the revelation inching closer. In the sterile quiet of the recovery wing, Daniel continued his routine with precision. He moved efficiently between patients, adjusting monitors, recording vitals, and updating charts with a consistency that earned quiet approval from the senior staff. But something had shifted. His assigned patient, Mr. Whitmore, was becoming more than just a file number or a post-op case. Their exchanges were brief, but the man's eyes had begun to follow him longer, his questions growing less generic and more pointed. On the 7th day, while Daniel checked the catheter line, Travis asked, "Your parents proud of you?" Daniel, caught off guard by the question's sudden personal tone, hesitated before replying. "My mom is. She's the reason I'm here, actually." "No dad?" Travis asked, his tone neutral, almost too casual. Daniel glanced up from the chart, his voice calm. "Never met him." Travis didn't respond right away. He stared at the ceiling for a long time, jaw tight. "Sometimes people aren't ready," he said, almost to himself. "They make choices they can't take back." Daniel gave a short nod, not reading too deeply into it. He'd heard sentiments like that before. People in hospitals often grew reflective, especially after facing mortality. He checked the IV levels and made a few notes before preparing to leave. "Daniel, right?" Travis asked before he could exit the room. "Yes," Daniel replied. "You ever think about who your father might have been?" The question, though softly asked, struck a nerve. Daniel turned slightly, offering a controlled answer. "Sometimes, but it's not something I dwell on." Travis nodded again, slowly. Probably a fool to have missed all this. Daniel offered a small smile, the professional kind. "Have a good evening, Mr. Whitmore." The door closed gently behind him, but the conversation lingered. Back at the dorm that night, Daniel found himself staring at the ceiling, echoing that final line, "Probably a fool." He didn't know why it stuck. Maybe it was the way the man had said it, like he was speaking to a ghost. Maybe it was just the exhaustion, the emotional fog that came with caring for lives not your own. Whatever it was, Daniel couldn't quite shake it. Travis, alone in the dim light of the hospital room, sat with the chart he had asked the nurse to leave behind. He had reread Daniel's full name at least a dozen times, Whitmore, Cincinnati, born the same year Emily left. He hadn't allowed himself to remember much about her until now. He'd filed that chapter away, convinced himself it was the right decision. But now, With every breath burning in his chest and every monitor beeping to keep him alive, his certainty crumbled. He had watched Daniel move, speak, react. There was something achingly familiar in the calm he carried, in the steady hands, the way he listened without judgment. Something in the shape of his jaw, the slope of his nose. Details he hadn't thought about in years, now haunting him in real time. He began to wonder about the life he had missed, the first steps, the first words, the birthdays. Had Emily been alone through all of it? Had she told the boy anything about him? Did Daniel even know his name? Travis didn't ask more. Not yet. He needed to be sure. But the possibility had cracked something open. And with it came a deep, gnawing guilt he hadn't felt in over a decade. The next morning, Daniel returned to his duties. Mr. Whitmore seemed quieter than usual. He didn't initiate conversation, but his eyes followed Daniel carefully, as if trying to memorize something. During a routine blood pressure check, he said softly, "You're going to make a great doctor." "Thank you," Daniel replied, focused on the monitor. "I mean it. You've got something. Rare. It's not just skill. It's how you look at people." Daniel didn't know how to respond to that. Praise from patients wasn't uncommon, but this felt personal. He nodded, noted the readings, and moved on. But again, the words stayed with him. Later that day, while organizing files for patient reports, he came across a stack of older charts from the same wing. Out of curiosity, he looked back at Mr. Whitmore's pre-op file. This time he read it slowly. The name struck him harder than before. Travis K. Whitmore. His hand froze on the page. The name matched the one his mother had spoken only once, years ago. He remembered it clearly because it had come during one of the rare conversations about his father. She had said it gently, but with finality. His name was Travis. He wasn't ready. Daniel stared at the file, heart pounding. Whitmore, Cincinnati, age, timeline. There was no way this could be a coincidence. He closed the folder, hands trembling slightly. He didn't tell anyone, not that day. Instead, he went to the hospital library and searched through archived directories and digital records. Old addresses, employment files, public records. The pieces began to fall together. His father, his actual biological father, was the man recovering in room 312. And he had no idea that the son he had once refused to raise had been at his bedside every day, watching over him, keeping him alive. Daniel didn't cry. He didn't get angry. He sat there in silence, absorbing the enormity of the truth. The question he had never asked, the answer his mother had never forced upon him, now stood in front of him with an almost cruel clarity. He returned to the dorm that night without calling Emily. He didn't know what to say yet. He needed to understand how he felt first, about the man, about the silence, about the strange irony of it all. He needed time, but that time was running out, because the next morning, Travis asked for him by name. The call came just after 6 o'clock in the evening. Emily was in the kitchen preparing a simple dinner, slicing carrots for soup, when her phone vibrated on the counter. She wiped her hands on a towel, expecting a routine update from Daniel, perhaps something about a new rotation or another quiet breakthrough. But when she saw his name flash across the screen, something felt different. There was no photo attached, no cheerful ringtone, just the default buzz and the growing weight of uncertainty she had carried for weeks. She answered quickly, masking her breathlessness. "Hey, sweetheart. Everything okay?" Daniel's voice was steady, but subdued. "Yeah, I just finished for the day. Thought I'd call like usual." Emily sensed the shift instantly. His tone lacked the energy he usually carried after long hours, that quiet excitement he rarely admitted, but couldn't fully hide. She lowered the flame under the pot and leaned against the counter. "Long day?" she asked, trying to keep her voice light. "A bit," he said. "There was a lot going on in the recovery wing. One of the patients was talking more today. He asked for me by name." Emily closed her eyes briefly. "Did he say why?" Daniel paused. "Not exactly. He just seemed, curious. He's been watching me, I guess. Said I reminded him of someone." Emily didn't answer right away. She walked slowly into the living room and sat down, her free hand clutching the armrest. "And what do you think?" she asked carefully. "I think I know who he is," Daniel replied, his voice quieter now. "I checked his file again. His name is Travis Whitmore. Same last name as me. Same city. Timeline fits. It's him, Mom. It has to be. Emily didn't breathe for a moment. The name spoken aloud by her son, in that voice she had raised alone, landed with a heaviness she had never fully prepared for. I didn't tell him, Daniel continued. I don't think he knows. Emily's voice came soft and steady. I wasn't sure how to tell you. I knew it would come one day, but I didn't think it would be like this. Daniel let the silence stretch for a beat, then said, I'm not angry, just trying to understand how I feel. I understand, she said, and she did, more than she could explain in one phone call. I saved his life, Daniel said next, almost as if trying to make sense of it by saying it out loud. I didn't know it was him, but I did. I helped keep him alive. I know, Emily whispered. There was a pause before Daniel asked, Did he know about me? After you left? She took a deep breath. No, he never asked, never reached out, not once. I got one letter from his lawyer before the surgery, cold, impersonal. He wanted to know if there were any legal ties left between us. That was it. Daniel's voice hardened just slightly. So, I really was nothing to him. No, Emily said quickly. You were never nothing. You were everything. His choice never changed that. I don't think he remembers your name, Daniel said. Not yet, but I think he's starting to suspect. He looks at me like he's trying to piece something together. Emily stood and walked to the window. Outside, the sky was painted in deep orange and soft indigo. The city was quiet, the street below nearly empty. She had stood at that window many times, watching seasons pass, waiting for Daniel to come home from school, from work, from his first dates. But tonight the distance between them felt immeasurable. What are you going to do? She asked. I don't know yet, Daniel said. Part of me wants to tell him. Look him in the eye and say, I'm the kid you didn't want. But another part of me thinks, maybe he already knows. And that's punishment enough. Emily nodded, knowing he couldn't see her. You don't owe him anything. Not your story. Not your forgiveness. Daniel sighed. But I'm not sure if I need anything from him either. That's the strange part. I thought I'd want answers if I ever met him. But now that I'm here, all I feel is distance. He's just a man on a bed with a repaired heart. And you, Emily said gently, are the one who gave him the chance to keep living. Daniel didn't speak right away. Then, after a moment, he said, He asked what made me want to become a doctor. Emily felt a lump rise in her throat. What did you tell him? I said my mother. That she raised me on her own, that she was strong and smart and never gave up. I told him I wanted to help people the way she helped me. Emily's eyes filled, but she kept her voice even. Then you told him the truth. Daniel laughed softly. He just nodded. I think that hurt him more than anything else could have. She smiled faintly. Good. Another pause. Then Daniel said, I don't think I need him in my life, Mom. But if he asks, I might tell him who I am. Just so there's no more pretending. Not for me. You do what feels right for you, she said. I trust your heart. I always have. The call ended a few minutes later. Emily stood at the window long after, the soup forgotten on the stove. She didn't cry. The tears had already been shed years ago, in a different life. What she felt now wasn't sadness. It was release. The truth had caught up to them all, and it had come not with vengeance but with clarity. Across the city, in a quiet hospital room, Travis lay awake, staring at the ceiling. He had not asked for Daniel by accident. The name, the posture, the voice, they had haunted him for days. And now the fog was lifting. The truth pressed against the edges of his conscience, and for the first time in years he was afraid to face it. But the moment was coming, and so was the answer. The sun had already dipped below the horizon by the time Emily arrived at Memorial Heart Center. She wore a long grey coat and carried no bag. The air was cool and sharp, the fluorescent glow of the hospital lights pressing against the twilight like a silent beacon. Her steps were measured, steady, even as her heart raced beneath her blouse. The decision to come had not been made lightly. She had waited for the moment to reveal itself, and now it had. Inside, the lobby was hushed, with only the quiet shuffle of nurses and the occasional murmur from the front desk. She walked toward the main elevator, the familiar corridors bringing back a flood of sensations she thought she had long since buried. The smell of antiseptic, the rhythmic hum of machines, the weight of memory pressing like a second skin. She reached the third floor and paused. The corridor stretched ahead, softly lit, lined with doors she didn't need to read. She already knew where to go. Each step forward felt like walking into a life she had never expected to revisit. Room 312. The door was partially open. Inside, the room was dim, the blinds drawn. Travis lay in the bed, half reclined, eyes closed. His skin had regained some color, but his frame still looked fragile, as if the years had finally caught up to the strength he once wore like armor. Machines whispered beside him, quiet and constant. Emily stood at the doorway for a long moment, her hand resting on the frame. Then she stepped inside. Travis opened his eyes slowly, sensing movement. He looked at her, at first with confusion, then with something heavier. Recognition came not all at once, but in stages, like a photograph slowly developing in darkroom light. "Emily," he said, his voice barely audible. She didn't answer right away. She simply pulled the chair beside the bed and sat. Her posture was straight, her face calm. She hadn't come for closure. She hadn't come for answers. She had come to witness something she didn't even know how to name. "I wasn't sure if you'd ever know," she said quietly. Travis looked at her, eyes wide. "He's mine, isn't he?" Emily nodded once. He swallowed hard, the muscles in his throat working around words that didn't come. "How long have you known?" "Since the moment I saw the hospital name on the surgery request. I knew you were here. I knew Daniel was there too." He turned his face away, his breathing uneven. He never said anything. He didn't know. Not at first. But now he does. Travis covered his face with one hand, the other gripping the edge of the blanket. "I didn't recognize him. I didn't see it." "You weren't looking," Emily said, her voice even but not unkind. Travis dropped his hand slowly. "He's brilliant, strong, kind. I saw it before I knew. He reminded me of someone I couldn't place." "You didn't raise him," Emily said. "You didn't earn the right to see yourself in him." He nodded again, unable to argue. "I made a mistake." "It wasn't a mistake," she corrected. "It was a decision." Travis looked at her, the pain unmistakable. "You left and You forced me to," she interrupted, her tone sharper now. "I begged you to see him for what he was even before he was born, and you told me to get rid of him or get out. So I got out." He didn't defend himself. He couldn't. The silence that followed was not tense. It was full of all the years between them, all the nights she had held Daniel close and all the mornings she had stood alone. "He saved your life," she said after a while. "And he doesn't even hate you for what you did. He just doesn't need you." Travis closed his eyes again, a long breath shuddering out. "Why did you come?" Emily reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small photograph. She placed it on the tray beside his bed. It was Daniel, age 7, grinning with missing front teeth, a paper crown on his head. "I wanted you to see what you missed." He looked at the photo, his hand shaking as he picked it up. "I've thought about that moment 1,000 times," he said, voice broken. "You standing at the door, me saying those words. I thought I was protecting myself, my career, my future. I didn't think I was destroying a life." "You didn't destroy anything," Emily said, standing now. "I built it back." He looked up at her, his eyes wet. Does he want to talk to me?" She shook her head. "He might tell you his name, but he's not looking for a father. He already had everything he needed." Emily turned toward the door, her coat swaying gently behind her. She paused once, hand on the knob, then looked back. "You'll get better. That's what you wanted, right? A second chance. You've got it. Use it for something." Then she left the room, the door closing quietly behind her. Travis sat alone, the photograph still in his hand. On the monitor beside him, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat traced a thin green line across the screen, as if to remind him, this life continues, whether he deserved it or not. The morning light crept slowly through the blinds in room 312, soft and pale, casting muted lines across the foot of the hospital bed. Travis lay still, his eyes closed, breath steady, but sleep had eluded him for hours. The photo Emily left remained on the table next to the call button, untouched since she departed. It had drawn his attention throughout the night, a child's grin frozen in time, too innocent for the weight of the truth that had finally landed like a stone on his chest. He had always imagined that if he were to face his past, It would be on his terms, in a carefully controlled moment where he might offer a dignified apology, explain himself, maybe even craft something close to redemption. But nothing about this was controlled. The boy had walked into his life unknowingly, not with anger or confrontation, but with surgical skill and compassion. That was the part that hollowed him out most. A quiet knock broke the silence. The door opened a few inches, and Daniel stepped in. He was no longer in scrubs, but wore a simple jacket, his expression unreadable. Travis straightened slightly, pain flickering in his movements. Daniel closed the door behind him and stood near the foot of the bed, arms loosely crossed. "I figured you'd be awake," Daniel said, his voice calm but stripped of its usual warmth. Travis nodded. "I was hoping you'd come." Daniel walked to the side of the bed, stood where Emily had sat the night before, and looked at the man not as a patient, but as someone who once made a decision that changed both their lives forever. "You know who I am now," Daniel said. "Yes," Travis replied. "I know." There was a pause. Daniel didn't fill it with stories or accusations. He simply let the weight of truth sit between them. When he finally spoke again, his words were precise. "My name is Daniel Whitmore. I was born 10 months after my mother walked out of your house with nothing but a suitcase. You told her to get rid of me. She didn't." Travis opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked at his hands, the veins beneath the skin stark against the hospital gown. "I don't expect forgiveness." "I didn't come to offer it," Daniel said. "I came because I wanted you to hear it from me." Travis nodded slowly, as if each movement carried the weight of years. "I've thought about you," he said. "Not at first, not for a long time. I convinced myself I had done the right thing, but in the quiet moments I wondered." Daniel didn't move. "She never spoke badly about you, not once." That made Travis flinch, the shame on his face sudden and sharp. "She should have." "She didn't need to," Daniel said. The silence said enough. Travis looked up, meeting his son's eyes for the first time without pretense. "I don't deserve this conversation, but thank you for letting me have it." Daniel studied him. "You don't get to know who I am now. Not really, but I think you should know what I've become." Travis nodded, listening. "I've earned 2 scholarships. I've volunteered more hours than I can count. I've been working toward becoming a cardiovascular surgeon for years. And last week, I helped save your life." Travis swallowed hard, tears gathering but not falling. "You did." Daniel took a deep breath. "When I found out who you were, I didn't feel rage. I didn't want revenge. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't anything like you." That statement sat between them like a truth too sharp to soften. Travis let out a shaky breath. "You're not. You're better." Daniel turned toward the door but paused before leaving. She did it all on her own. Every night shift, every illness, every birthday. If you remember nothing else after this, remember that she never let me believe I was unwanted. Not for a second. "I believe that," Travis said, voice cracking. "I believe she loved you more than anything." "She still does," Daniel said. "And she's the reason you're still alive." He opened the door but didn't walk out. "One more thing," he said without turning. "You can live the rest of your life however you want, but you won't be part of mine." And with that, he left the room. Travis remained where he was, breathing unevenly. He didn't cry, he couldn't. Not in the way people do when something tragic happens. It wasn't a tragedy that unfolded in that room. It was something else. The quiet reckoning of a man who had been given a glimpse of the life he turned away from, and who now had to live with the unbearable knowledge that he hadn't been erased, only forgotten. Outside the room, Daniel walked past the nurse's station without acknowledging anyone. He stepped into the stairwell instead of waiting for the elevator, needing the movement, the sensation of control. He descended slowly, each step grounding him more than the last. There was no relief in the moment, only a strange kind of finality. At the lobby, he stepped out into the evening air. The wind had picked up slightly, brushing against his face. He pulled his jacket tighter and kept walking. He didn't call his mother. Not yet. He needed time to let the weight of the conversation settle. But as he walked through the fading light, he felt something he hadn't expected. Not pride, not pain, just peace. The day after Daniel left the hospital room, Travis didn't speak to anyone. The nurses came and went, adjusting IVs, checking vitals, replacing linens, but he remained silent. He responded with nods when necessary, answered with monosyllables when asked about pain or discomfort, but otherwise he said nothing. The photograph Emily had left sat beside his tray table, untouched but not ignored. He looked at it often, not with nostalgia, but with an aching kind of disbelief. The boy in the picture, with the crooked grin and bright eyes, had become the man who had walked into his room and delivered a truth so heavy it had broken something open inside him. For the first time since the surgery, Travis asked the nurse for a pen and paper. She handed them over without question. He sat in bed, back slightly propped, and stared at the blank page. He didn't know how to start. What do you say to a son you never knew, who had saved your life and then walked away? What could possibly be written that hadn't already been spoken in silence? He started simply. I don't expect a reply, I just need to leave something behind. He wrote slowly, deliberately, not to plead, not to explain, but to confess. He acknowledged the choices he had made, not as mistakes but as acts of cowardice. He described how he had justified everything, convincing himself that letting Emily go was practical, that her leaving was inevitable, that his career couldn't bear the weight of an unplanned child. But as he wrote, he stopped using justifications. He wrote what was true. I didn't know how to love something I couldn't control. He paused there, the ink still wet, hand trembling, then continued. I thought fear was strength, that telling her to choose was power, but now I see it was weakness. She made the harder choice, and she lived with it. I ran from mine. The letter wasn't long. He folded it carefully, placed it in an envelope, and wrote one word on the front: Daniel. He left it with the head nurse and gave instructions that it be passed on only if Daniel ever returned. He doubted he would, and that, he knew, was something he would have to carry without closure. Meanwhile, Daniel returned to his rotation quietly. He said nothing about the visit, nothing about the truth that had unraveled behind closed doors. His mentors praised his focus. Other interns noted his poise. But inside, he felt as though something fundamental had shifted. Not broken, but realigned. The question that had haunted him for so long had been answered, and though the answer didn't bring comfort, it brought clarity. He didn't tell his mother right away. Not because he was hiding anything, but because he wanted to carry the weight on his own a little longer. He needed time to translate the emotions into something solid before he could speak them aloud. But Emily felt the change the moment he called her 2 nights later. You sound different, she said gently. Daniel smiled faintly through the receiver. I am. Did you talk to him? Yes. She waited, but he offered no details. She didn't press. I said what I needed to say, he continued. I think he understood. I'm proud of you, she said. I know, he replied, and this time there was no hesitation in his voice. Back at home, Emily went to the drawer where she had kept all the old letters she had never sent, all the fears she had written down during long nights when Daniel was still learning to walk, to speak, to dream. She read one, just one, and then tore it into pieces and threw it away. She didn't need to carry that weight anymore. Her son had found his voice. He had faced the person who had once denied him and walked away with his dignity intact. Travis was discharged from the hospital 1 week later. He left quietly, refusing the standard offer of outpatient therapy, choosing instead to return to the empty home he had once feared filling. He did not contact Emily. He did not ask about Daniel again. The letter he had written remained with the nurse, who locked it in a drawer with other forgotten things. The silence that followed was not heavy with regret or bitterness. It was just silence. There were no more apologies, no more explanations, no more what-ifs. Life, which had once spiraled from a single decision made in a moment of fear, had now steadied into its own rhythm. There was no dramatic reconciliation, no grand gesture of redemption, just a quiet acceptance of the way things had unfolded. Daniel completed his internship with distinction. On his last day, he stood once more in the hallway outside room 312. The room had been cleaned, reset, the bed made with crisp white sheets. There was no sign of the man who had lain there, no photo, no trace. He didn't ask where Travis had gone. He didn't need to know. As he walked back toward the elevator, a nurse called his name. She handed him an envelope. This was left for you. He took it, recognized the handwriting instantly, and slipped it into his coat pocket without reading it. He carried it with him for several days, untouched. Then one evening, alone in his room, he opened it. He read every word once, slowly, and when he was done, he folded it again and placed it in a box with his acceptance letters, his certificates, and the photo of himself at 7 with the paper crown. He didn't cry. He didn't smile. He just sat quietly, feeling something shift inside him, not a wound, not a scar, but a kind of stillness, the kind that follows when a chapter finally ends. Years passed, quietly but fully. Daniel's path continued with purpose, each step taken without hesitation, yet never with arrogance. He completed medical school with honors, matched into a prestigious residency program, and quickly became known not just for his brilliance in the operating room, but for the way he treated every patient, with a patience and empathy that set him apart. Colleagues often noted it, sometimes in passing, other times in admiration. He listened longer than most. He explained more clearly, and above all, he never treated a chart as just a name or a case. Every person was someone's child, someone's parent, someone who mattered. Emily watched from a distance, always involved, never intrusive. She had built her life on sacrifice, but what she had gained was a kind of peace most people never touched. Her apartment changed over time, more photos on the walls, a brighter rug in the living room, new mugs in the kitchen she used whenever Daniel visited. She kept his old drawings in a folder beside her favorite recipe books. She never remarried, never needed to. She had been enough for both of them, and somehow that truth became her quiet victory. One afternoon, many years after that summer internship, Daniel was invited to speak at a medical conference. The topic wasn't technical. It wasn't about surgical advancements or experimental techniques. It was about patient care, what it meant to truly see someone, to heal not just the body but the person inside it. He stood at the podium before a crowd of seasoned professionals, residents and students, and spoke not from textbooks, but from memory. He told the story of a man with no listed emergency contacts who arrived on the edge of death and survived because people chose not to give up on him. He didn't name him, didn't need to, but he described the moment he realized that healing wasn't just about scalpel precision or blood pressure control. It was about presence, about forgiveness, about the silence between questions and the space it creates for understanding. After the speech, a young student approached him and asked how he learned to lead with compassion. Daniel didn't hesitate. "My mother taught me," he said. He didn't elaborate. He didn't have to. That sentence held every night she stayed awake beside him, every shift she worked through fevers and fatigue, every moment she chose dignity over resentment. Her strength had become the foundation of his gentleness. Her sacrifices had not hardened him, they had made him gracious. Not long after, Daniel received a letter in the mail. It was simple, written in neat, careful script. From Travis, short, no return address. "I don't ask for forgiveness. I only want to say thank you, not just for the surgery, for becoming someone better than I ever was. I will never deserve the life you've built, but I hope to carry its example in the time I have left." Daniel folded the letter once and placed it with the others. He didn't write back. There was nothing more to say. The peace between them had never been about words. In time, Emily grew older, her steps slower, but her eyes just as sharp. Daniel visited regularly, sometimes with a bouquet of sunflowers, sometimes with nothing but time and stories. They sat together on the couch where he had once done homework, laughed over childhood photos, and shared meals that had grown simpler but never less meaningful. One afternoon, Daniel came home with news. "They've offered me a position to lead the cardiac surgical program at the new hospital," he said. Emily looked at him, pride filling every line of her face. "Are you going to take it?" "I said yes," he replied, "but only if I can set the tone for how we treat people. I want it to be about more than outcomes." She reached for his hand the same way she had when he was little. "Then it will be." He nodded. "There's one more thing." She waited. "I want to name one of the community wings after you." Emily smiled, gently shaking her head. "You don't have to do that." "I know," he said, "but I want everyone who walks through those doors to know whose strength shaped mine." She didn't argue. She didn't try to diminish her role. She only held his hand a little tighter. The hospital accepted the proposal. The plaque outside the new wing read, "The Emily Whitmore Center for Family Health." Below it, a quote chosen by Daniel, "No act of care is ever wasted. Some of them save more than lives. They shape them." On the day of the dedication, Daniel stood beside his mother, surrounded by colleagues, families, patients, and press. He spoke briefly, humbly. He told the crowd that titles like doctor or surgeon meant nothing without compassion, that the best healers were those who understood what it meant to be broken and still chose to build. Emily didn't speak publicly. She never had. But when the ceremony ended and people began to drift away, she walked into the new wing, fingers brushing the wall, and whispered a simple thank you to the life she had chosen. It had been difficult, lonely at times, but it had also been full. Later that evening, Daniel sat alone in his office, reflecting. He pulled out the same box he had carried through every move, every new chapter. Inside were the folded drawings, the photo with the paper crown, the untouched letters and the note from Travis. He looked at them not with sadness, but with quiet reverence. This was the path that had brought him here. Every scar, every silence, every second of strength his mother had summoned. He closed the box gently and placed it back on the shelf. Then he returned to his work, to his patients, to the legacy not of pain, but of compassion, passed down not through blood, but through love.